in the final ocean plan amendments, so the sanitation districts and other wastewater authorities can support the amendments. The sanitation districts also endorsed the other requested changes to the draft amendments as identified in the testimony and comment letter from TriTAC, California Association of Sanitation Agencies, and the Southern California Alliance of POTWs. We're well aware that the stormwater community has expressed significant concerns regarding the draft amendments. If the Water Board cannot promptly address those concerns, the sanitation districts would ask that the Water Board adopt the provisions related to wastewater discharges this summer while continuing to work on the stormwater provisions. Prompt adoption of the wastewater provisions is necessary to allow the sanitation districts to complete its year 2050 Master Facilities Plan and associated EIS-EIR, which includes facilities to address important infrastructure integrity issues, to provide for future capacity needs, and to provide for provision of additional recycled water within our service area. As a result of this planning process, we've identified the need to build a new $500 million tunnel from the JWPCP to the existing outfall, and the designation of these new marine protected areas raised questions in our mind about continued use of the existing outfall. We've delayed completion of our facilities plan until the sustainability of continued use of our existing outfall is confirmed. And last, contrary to the statements coming from the environmental NGO community that the resolution should be enough to address POTW concerns, we feel that the regulatory certainty of ocean plan amendments is needed for us to continue to complete our facilities planning process. Sorry to have spoken so quickly. Thank you for your consideration of our comments. Thank you, Bob.
Joe Gully, you're marked as if necessary. Do you feel it's necessary?
If the board allows it, I'd like to defer my time until the end and to respond to any questions that you might have.
We'll do that.
Thank you.
Ashley Satovida. Did I come close?
Hi, Mr. Chairman and board members. I'm Ashley Satude with Townsend Public Affairs, speaking on behalf of Richard Bell from the Municipal Water District of Orange County. And the chairman already actually touched on our one comment. We submitted a full letter of comments, but MODOC would like to see the revision of the proposed amendment to allow subsurface intakes. The proposed amendment should provide clarification language to the proposed prohibition of seawater intakes to clarify that this does not apply to the use of subsurface intakes such as slant wells. As written, the prohibition may be construed to apply to all types of seawater intakes. It would be appropriate and protective to the ocean to allow the subsurface intakes such as slant beach well intakes or other environmentally protective subsurface or screened intakes in CWQPA GP areas. Thank you, and I have additional copies of MODOC's letter if anybody needs them.
Thank you, Ashley. Ms. Larson. Set the clock for 2 minutes, please.
The usual deal. Good morning, Chairman Hoppen and members of the board. My name is Bobby Larson. I'm here this morning on behalf of CASA, TriTAC, and the Southern California Alliance of POTWs. I thought if I did 3 organizations, maybe I would get 3 months.
Do they really call themselves SCAP?
It's an acronym within an acronym. We're pretty proud of it. I'm here today.
We're going to run out of acronyms here one of these days and start getting on the edge of things.
This amendment has several to offer. We're helping the alphabet soup out here with this. But I am pleased to be able to speak on the Ocean Plan amendments today. As I know you all are very aware, many of our members are municipal wastewater dischargers to ocean and coastal waters, and some of them, of course, do have discharges in areas where marine protected areas have been designated over the past several years under the Marine Life Protection Act. As such, our members are very interested in the approach that will be taken for designating and regulating state water quality protection areas pursuant to the I guess I should say this, Marine Managed Areas Improvement Act, thereby avoiding another acronym. And I do want to say at the outset that we very much appreciate the efforts of your staff to develop this amendment. We have had an opportunity to review it in the context of Resolution 2010-0057, which has been referenced a number of times already this morning. And generally, I have to say we're we're very supportive of the provisions related to municipal wastewater treatment. It seems that the board has really recognized the importance of public wastewater infrastructure and the substantial investment that our communities have made in these facilities that are needed to provide public health and safety, wastewater treatment, and environmental protection for California. So we do believe that the amendment recognizes that. We do have some comments on the specifics of the language, and we have submitted a detailed comment letter to you as of April 18th. So I just want to touch on a couple of the key issues in that letter. Also to note that we did try, and I believe we did provide suggested language for each of our proposed changes, most of which we view as clarifying. So hopefully it will be possible to have some of those reflected in the final draft of the plan. And first of all, we do feel, and I want to echo Mr. Freese's comments on this, that it's very important that the wastewater-related provisions do move forward in a prompt manner. We need certainty for the types of major projects that Phil was talking about. And so, again, I also want to echo his comments with regard to having all the provisions of the resolution reflected in the plan. I think there's sort of a general thought that, well, these things work together, they're compatible, you have the resolution and you have the implementing ocean plan, but in my view, in our view, it's critical to remove as much ambiguity as we can about there being any intent on the board's part to do something other than what it articulated in the resolution, because again, the ocean plan is the regulatory document. It's the document that's binding and that has effect in terms of the permitting and actions related to these projects. So unless the board has for some reason changed its view of the points that were adopted in that resolution, we believe that the best thing to do is simply reflect the entire resolution in the text of the ocean plan. We also had some comments on clarifying or tuning up some of the appendices and definitions, and so I would just direct you to our comment letter for those rather than try to articulate them. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on this question that did make your top list of issues, which is this question of mandating the dry weather diversions to wastewater treatment facilities. We agree that that is a solution that can and has worked in many localities, and where feasible, it's a good opportunity to take care of those flows, but we are very concerned about this being viewed as an across-the-board mandate. I think the letter that you received from the Orange County Sanitation District does a good job of articulating some of the concerns, and while we appreciate staff's comments that they would only require this where there's capacity, there are other issues besides capacity. There are the issues of the costs for connecting up to the system and who pays those, and how that, the stormwater community, for example, being subject to 218, how are they going to necessarily be able to pay those connection fees? There are water quality and pollutant quality issues that have to be addressed, because not in every case will the POTW necessarily discharge under the ocean. The POTW may be subject to very stringent inland requirements as well. So we think that it is better to allow this as an option to be evaluated, and we have suggested some language that would require the stormwater permittees to evaluate a suite of actions, including this one, in determining how to deal with those dry weather flows. So that's all that I have to say. We do have folks available who are much more knowledgeable than I, including Mr. Gully, to answer any questions you may have, but we would hope that the changes we proposed in our letter could be incorporated into the final version of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Robert Urim.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, my name is Robert Urim. I'm here today on behalf of the Irvine Company. We appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and of course the Irvine Company always maintains and shares your interest in protecting water quality for the coast. We did file a comment letter. One of the points Dominic has addressed, which is, and other commenters have raised as well, which is the clarification that this does not apply to enclosed bays and estuaries, and I think people have suggested specific amendments to the language, and I think it's section 7E1A2, and also in the appendix for the definition, so that would be terrific if those changes were made so there was no ambiguity about that. And the other kind of comment, and some other comments made, is sort of the procedural and related considerations related to CEQA and the 13241 and 242 provisions. And I understand the, the staff's view of the issue that this is a framework. They're not actually making any changes and things here, but they do have some prohibitions which they're establishing, which I think can fairly be viewed as water quality objectives, which is perhaps why this would be an appropriate time to make the analysis, and perhaps the comments on the dry weather flows would be, if the Port of Cologne analysis was made, people would be able to get some idea of what the costs and the benefits were of various alternatives. And the similar thing is the kind of the sparseness of the CEQA analysis, with the staff's view that this is not having any effect, therefore there's really no CEQA analysis. But seems to me that there's a relatively known universe of sites that are being affected by this. I think the presentation was with 141 sites, and so each one of those sites, it seems, would benefit, and we, the board would benefit in advance of taking its action, of knowing what was going on, what was the activity in there, and in particular, what exactly is the water quality threat that's being addressed. And that's one of the points we made in our comments, is that the staff says, they're really not making a scientific evaluation. They didn't subject this analysis to any peer review because there's no scientific analysis being made. And so without exactly knowing what water quality problem we're addressing and what the deficiencies are in the current system, it's a little hard to see what the overall need for the regulation. And I certainly understand what the LA Sanitation District and their particular need, perhaps for stormwater and other measures. It would be very helpful to have some additional analysis. And the only other point I'll make, since we did file a comment letter, is this issue about whether this is more stringent in some respects than not than the ASBS. And at least in the one point I understand is that there is additional monitoring provisions in here which seem to apply to all the outfalls, regardless of the size of the pipe. And I think the ASBS regulations only require discharges of 18 or 36 or larger there. And just concerned that we're not having more stringent regulations here than would be appropriate. The trash prohibition is certainly very stringent, as is the dry weather. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Robert. Dominic, could you or one of your staff respond to Mr. Urum's comment about the size of the pipe and the ASBS?
Certainly. The ASBS general exception that was adopted does have an 18-inch size limit for monitoring. The proposed amendment does not mention sizes, but it does allow a review or a survey of different threat discharges. So we didn't want to give specific sizes because it could be that many of the discharges are very low threat. There might be one or two medium and maybe one high threat, and we didn't want to necessarily be very prescriptive on that. So we're essentially leaving that up to the discharger to make that determination on their own, and that's why we did not give sizes. As opposed to what we did with the ASBSs, where we basically said all discharges are prohibited unless you're covered under this exception. However, monitor this size and above because we think these offer the greatest threat. So that was a very prescriptive approach. This was not in the proposed amendment.
So under this, even in an ASBS, if the discharger felt that a pipe less than 18 inches was of significant threat, they could choose to monitor it themselves, but it would not be mandated under this policy.
That's correct.
Mr. Urum, do you want to come up and tell him what a nice guy he is?
I appreciate that. Actually, there was one other point I meant to mention, if I can go back up there, which is when I read the nomination criteria in the process, and this kind of relates to whether you do a CEQA analysis, whether you do the Port of Cologne analysis, it's not very clear to me how the state board or anyone else making a nomination would decide which of the MPAs get the designation and which don't. And so I'm assuming that probably all of them are going to end up being designated. So the lack of criteria at that side and sort of the assumption that maybe everything's going to pass through does seem to me to make it feasible and worthwhile to analyze the effects of this in advance. So
I think when we're done with this policy, you'll have ample opportunity to have those questions answered, and I think they'll be, taken care of. Friend, you have a comment?
Well, how will these areas be nominated? I think that's what he's asking. And it will come from a number of sources, which is, I assume, why we haven't said who's going to do it, because you can do it yourself. Other stakeholders in the area could make the nomination. I mean, it's
Right, so-
pretty open.
Right, so the question I would have is, if when someone makes a nomination, what are the standards that you would decide to accept the nomination or not? They're really not set up to, or you're going to have this, you have this threat, this is the reason. So it just seems to me you leave yourself with a blank slate rather than having helpful guidance in the future, which says, okay, here's how we're going to divide these things up. So when you're looking at this now and trying to decide whether the framework is a good or a bad framework, it's really hard to say, because you can't, the sifting process isn't there. You can't see what's going to go through the sifter and what's going to, get sorted out. So that's just my thought.
Maybe I can respond for a minute to that, because I think that's a great question. It was not in the scope of what we were looking at with this. We were addressing what kind of requirements we would place on these state water quality protected areas, general protection areas, as opposed to ASBSs, which are clear now in our their prohibition of discharge. This is a description of what we would apply. It was not meant to be a screening criteria for how we would nominate or approve them. And so it's a great question, but it is totally outside of the scope of what we were looking at when we put this together. Now, if you would like us to go back and start again and look at that issue, we could do that. I think you would hear some concerns from some of the other folks on that issue. Or if you would like us to consider this as part of our next triennial review for, developing criteria for how we would do that, we'd be happy to look at that also. But I don't think in the time frame that we're looking at today that we could come up with a new set of criteria for that.
Thank you, John. Ryan Broom.
Good morning. I'm Ryan Barron, Senior Deputy County Counsel on behalf of the County of Orange. Pardon me for not wearing a jacket today. I left it in TSA security as I was sprinting with shoes in hand to a closed Southwest airline gate, where they begrudgingly let me on the plane in this post 9/11 era. So,
Can I use that excuse sometime? I'm always looking for an excuse to leave my jacket behind. So.
I normally would blame it.
I don't want to plagiarize you, but.
The county offers the following legal comments, summaries of which would have been more fully addressed in our April 18th letter. The county operates an extensive flood control system, and the Ocean Plan Amendment regulates stormwater, or appears to regulate stormwater more stringently than wastewater. Throughout the staff report in SCD, stormwater is included in the general wastewater discussion and is often cited as an example of a waste discharge. There is actually no definition of wastewater in the Ocean Plan Amendment or the Ocean Plan itself. However, the OPA carves out separate requirements for stormwater than for wastewater. A general protection area will not be designated over existing point source wastewater discharges, yet under the MS4 section for stormwater at section E5C, quote, existing waste discharges are allowed so long as they don't cause undesirable ocean water quality, end quote. This is inconsistent, and more analysis would be needed as to why the two are treated or analyzed, I guess, synonymously, if you will, but regulated differently. This disparity is also contrary to the Marine Managed Areas Improvement Act, which only limits waste discharges in state water quality protection areas where no other use is restricted. Secondly, the imposition of a zero trash and zero dry weather runoff for general protection areas requires analysis of the specific factors set forth at Water Code sections 13241 and 42, as these are not just new criteria or programs of implementation, but are new water quality objectives. Third, an analysis of the burdens and costs associated with the characterization, assessment, and monitoring of existing discharges in general protection areas is required in order to comply with Water Code section 13165. It is difficult for us to determine the burdens on the impacted party and make relevant comments on the OPA without this analysis. Fourth, all 90 items on the CEQA checklist have been marked no impact on the basis that general protection areas have been designated or are yet to be designated. However, the GP criteria to prohibit trash and dry weather runoff will cause new control strategies to be implemented for MS4s. Implementation of new control strategies will have an adverse impact on those areas surrounding an NPA where those prohibited materials will be diverted. Prohibited materials will have to be diverted somewhere, and CEQA cannot be piecemealed to a future board action. Lastly, the no action alternative should be given stronger consideration. It concludes that there is no regulatory alternative other than to protect MPAs by an ASBS designation, and dismisses the fact that state and regional boards do have the ability to address GP-like areas through permits on a regional and case-by-case basis unique to that MPA. Per the Fish and Game Code, the legislature intended that MPA designation and protection be done by biogeographical region. Under the nomenclature of regulatory certainty and a statewide framework, the staff report baldly concludes that a one-size-fits-all approach is needed so that existing and future permittees will have budgetary certainty for repair and replacement projects, which, by the way, future permittees will probably not be permitted in a general protection zone. So we see a financial analysis for CEQA, but not necessarily an analysis for the reporting requirements, which we find is inconsistent. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ryan. Mary Ann Skorpanich.
Good morning, Chairman Hoppen and members of the board. I'm Mary Ann Skorpanich from the County of Orange, where I manage the OC Watersheds program. We have submitted our written comments, so I wanted to highlight a few of those here today, and also appreciate Member Dodek's comments on the earlier item on your agenda today, that you put out a draft, you look for comments and feedback from affected stakeholders in an effort to improve those, and that's the spirit with which both our comments in our letter and those presented today are offered. We think that the document lacks a great deal of clarity. There are a number of items that are not clear. I was pleased to see in the staff presentation this morning exclusion of bays and estuaries, for example, and other pieces of the framework that are not included here, but as we described in our comment letter in more detail, there are a number of those where we just think the document is not clear on those points and could benefit greatly by greater clarification. There's also some clarity issues in other points that were not mentioned in the staff report, mainly that this general protection designation could be applied elsewhere to other unique and sensitive areas. It's really not clear what the effect of that is or how that would go about. In section E, parentheses 3, it says that the designation for the general protection areas could apply to ASBS's, GPs, or both. And it's not clear how those two different sets of regulations would apply if it's designated as an ASBS and a GP at the same time. It's not clear about the nomination process. In parts of the document, it suggests that the state board would take the lead role on the nomination process for general protection areas. Other places it says the regional board. We also think that there are a number of technical and scientific improvements that could be made to this document before it is approved. For example, the peer review, it appears to be a somewhat circular argument that you're not making scientific findings here, yet you're approving a framework that applies and it, by its nature implicitly should have a scientific basis to it. We think that it merits a full peer review that would be consistent with the state's continuing planning process, with the health and safety code, and the MPA process itself. We think some general scientific questions should be evaluated in the course of this peer review, such as what is the general health of our coastal ocean waters? What are the trends in water quality in these waters? Has a lack of a general protection designation such as this caused any water quality challenges? And what we feel is very important is what are background and reference conditions or natural waters? That's not defined here. There is some science on there that SWRCB and others have produced that we think should be included in this analysis. And then just to address the general question of what are the expected benefits from such a regulation. Natural quality is described in the amendment. but it's not defined anywhere in there. We feel that the water quality criteria in Table 1 are overly stringent and difficult to achieve. We're hearing that the treatment systems, either by a POTW or other treatment system, is not required, but appears to be in the basis of meeting some of the prohibitions that are laid out. These are very difficult kinds of things to do in the coastal zone, both because of land use available, the cost of land in those areas, and building large treatment systems that would go unused for 90% of the year. We feel that for Orange County in particular, we have 42 miles of coastline that are really critical to both our quality of life in Orange County and a vital part of our economy. We're very interested in the protection of those coastal waters. We think this amendment to the ocean plan could use some improvements before adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Lucas.
Thank you. My name is Bob Lucas. I'm here representing the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance. We do have a few comments. They were incorporated.
That's what Bobby Larson would call SEEB, I guess, isn't it?
SEEB.
Yeah.
Yes. An acronym within an acronym.
Uh-huh.
So we did submit a comment letter, and I will review a couple of the major comments here in a moment. I wanted to ask a question, though. Is today's presentation available? The slides that you presented, are they online right now? Or can they be?
No, they're not online. The presentations will be on DVD.
So I should talk to you about getting them?
We'd be happy to make them available for anyone that would like them. We'll put them online.
Thank you. There was some information on a couple of those slides I'd like to pass along. So I suppose that I should start off with the same set of comments that I made during the ABS hearing about utility vaults and underground structures. I think you probably recall those comments. Beneath every manhole there's a vault. There's grates in the street. These vaults and underground structures covered by grates do not generate water, but they do collect water. They collect storm water, and sometimes there's groundwater seepage. And when there are utility issues that require access to these locations, that water needs to be pumped out. The Water Board has a general NPDES permit for for dewatering vaults, which prohibits the discharge of any contaminated water, but allows it to be discharged to the stormwater system. When contamination is detected, those vaults are pumped, but that is also a very difficult process, and we try to keep that to a minimum when we can. The way we read the policy as drafted, it's similar to the ABS policy that we addressed a couple of weeks ago, in that it would prohibit those discharges, because these are not stormwater flows, these are non-stormwater flows, and there's a general prohibition in this proposed policy against those types of flows. We would request that specific language, perhaps similar to what you agreed to do for the ABS, to address this situation, be incorporated in any amendments that you propose to this policy. You look like you have a question, Charlie.
No, I thought it was dealt with.
It was in the ABS, yes, ASBS, but it's not dealt with here, at least not yet. But we'd like to see it dealt with if that's possible. Okay.
You want to clarify that, Dominic?
Certainly.
So, because I felt that it was.
Yeah, so we did provide that language in the resolution for ASBS, the general exception. This amendment was posted and released to the public before that last board meeting on March 20th, and so we didn't have the opportunity to change that in this amendment yet. It's just the timing hasn't worked out that well.
But when word.
Yes, yet is the operative word. So we would make the same statement in the amendment that we did with the general exception.
But I still have concern that those vaults may be hiding urban terrorists.
I don't think your permit covers that. Okay, the second point that I'll make, and I'll try to keep this brief, is that the way our members are reading this proposal, it appears that the management standards are being changed from ocean plan objectives to natural water quality. And we view that as a significant change. This is one of the reasons why I'd like to review those slides, because one of those slides addressed this point. If our members are wrong and they're misreading this, then any clarification that can be provided would be excellent. But they're concerned now that because of the number of these protected areas, that moving from ocean plan objectives to natural water quality as a standard is quite a significant change. And we'd like you to reconsider that. We think that's inconsistent under the underlying act. So I'm not pressing for anything on that today, but I did want to mention to you that our people think that that's going to raise the cost of implementation here considerably and add a lot of subjectivity to what would otherwise be an objectively guided management system. And with that, just one comment on process. The last time that we submitted comments and we worked through the ASBS situation, our comments with regard to the vaults and other things were included in our comment letter. They were disregarded. And as such, there were no changes to the subsequent draft that addressed the comments that we provided in our letter. In the notice of the subsequent draft, we were prohibited from providing another set of formal comments because there were no changes related to the comments we had already made, and we were restricted to providing comments only to those things that changed, which means we couldn't submit another formal letter to you with regard to the comments that we thought should have been addressed but weren't. When you couple that with the ex parte limitations that you have as board members, that prohibits us from coming to you about things before board hearings, that left it up to the hearing for us to toss back out these issues that we originally put in our comment letter and ask the board to deal with it during the adoption hearing, which is a very awkward process, and it requires rushed language preparation.
It worked though, didn't it?
It did in that one instance. This particular letter has a lot more in it, and it's a more comprehensive letter. We would hope that the process that you would use this time around would be that if the staff decides not to address comments that we make in our original letter, that you not prohibit us from making comments again on those points when the revised draft comes out, just so that we can get those points out on the table. Otherwise, we would come and talk with you, but since we're barred from doing that, it just pushes everything to the adoption hearing, and it makes life a lot more difficult.
I must have been drinking happy tea when I was briefed on this thing, because I mean, I understand your comments, but I don't see where the concern is. But John, maybe you can allay some of these concerns.
Well, first, I'm going to jump in and act as chief counsel because Michael's so slow. Did you like to respond to that?
I was just going to address a brief issue which has to do with the ex parte issue. And this particular item, as an ocean plan amendment, is not something that would be subject to ex parte. And, you know, obviously, you all hear routinely from people whose comments haven't been addressed, or they feel like they've been addressed inadequately and want additional changes. You know, the reality is, and the reason over time that the board, as well as other agencies, have gotten into the practice of limiting comments is to those changed issues, is this is a funnel. You know, we're trying to winnow down the issues that are still in dispute that staff are trying to address. Certainly people are still free to state that, you know, their original comments stand, and that is actually the assumption that I think most of you have when you look at responses to comments. I mean, I think your staff do an incredible job in terms of responding both to the legal, technical, and policy arguments, but we're not under any illusion that because they've put together a comprehensive response to comments at the conclusion of a process that everybody's happy and agrees and has abandoned their original positions. So I was going to wait to answer that question until John had answered your question, Charlie, but I'll turn it back over to him.
I've forgotten what your other question was. I'm sorry.
Actually, Charlie, I'm okay. If ex parte doesn't apply here, then we have an avenue to come and talk with you if there are things that we thought should have been addressed and weren't, and that would be sufficient. We're just looking for an avenue to get our thoughts out before having to go use our 3 minutes of time to make
I don't give me the 3-minute deal. I'm not even looking at the clock.
It's 5 minutes to begin with.
Are you feeling
All right.
unduly persecuted today, Bob, or something?
No. I did want to make that process comment, though, but if we don't have ex parte on this particular item, then we're okay.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Nice seeing you. Glad the roses are blooming. That's always refreshing to me. Sarah? Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Hoppen and board members. My name is Sarah Amanzada, and I'm the Policy Director for California Coastkeeper Alliance. I'm here today on behalf of not only California Coastkeeper Alliance, but Heal the Bay, Surfrider Foundation, and Natural Resources Defense Council. Our group submitted detailed written comments and suggested changes to the proposed amendment to the Ocean Plan on April 18th. So rather than restating those comments, I will highlight just a couple of key issues today. I'd be remiss if I didn't state at the outset that we do not believe there's any need to formally amend the Ocean Plan to address state water quality protection areas, given the board's adoption of Resolution 2010-0057 in November 2010, which addressed these issues. And I asked the board to consider entities' requests for regulatory certainty in the context of the board's larger mandate to protect ocean water quality and health that so many coastal communities depend on, as well as our coastal economy. Provision 2 is of particular concern because it restricts the state board's ability to regulate water quality. And if the board does choose to move forward with this amendment, I urge you to strike Provision 2, which in its current form creates a blanket exemption for continued municipal wastewater discharges in MPAs. The intent of MPA designation under the MLPA and state water quality protection areas under the authority of the Marine Managed Areas Improvement Act is to protect important marine life, ecosystems, habitats, and resources from negative impacts, including undesirable alteration of natural water quality from any source. These laws do not include language supporting exemptions for existing municipal wastewater dischargers. In fact, Section 36710F of the MMAIA distinguishes non-point source controls with the express limitation of regulating discharges to the extent practicable. There is no similar language in that section qualifying an exemption for point source dischargers. The State Water Board should help facilitate the effective implementation of the Marine Life Protection Act through the Ocean Plan. And at a minimum, the board should refrain from formal adoption of an exemption that prohibits future regulation protecting ecologically important areas. Such regulation would be wholly appropriate if wastewater is causing or contributing to degradation of marine life, habitat, and/or water quality in nearby MPAs. On a positive note, I do want to thank the board and staff and strongly support the inclusion of Provision 6, which denotes the board's prioritization of TMDL development for impaired MPAs and state water quality protected areas, as well as impaired tributaries that drain to these areas. And I also just want to pose a question which perhaps could either be addressed today or if not today in response to comments. I was confused about the two-tiered protection laid out in the presentation, particularly since staff recognized that 23 areas of special biological significance overlap with 41 MPAs. So just concerned for implementation purposes for both dischargers and board staff as to how this two-tiered protection would be put in place.
So I'll try to answer that. There are 23 ASBSs currently, and we're in the process of implementing your recent resolution on the special protections. There are marine protected areas that are not co-located with ASBS. Those would be considered for state water quality protection areas, the general protection type, not an ASBS necessarily. In the future, according to what's already come up as the nomination process, which is an existing process that already exists in the Ocean Plan. And so all we're doing in the amendment is just to say that that same process would be used whether it was a new ASBS or a new GP. And we don't have any GPs yet, and we would wait to have that process take place in the future. We're not planning to bring those MPAs that are not currently co-located with an ASBS. We're not planning to bring those to the board now. And even if we were, we'd still have to work very closely with the regional boards and stakeholders to do that. So the two-tiered system is designed to have a greater level of protection for ASBSs, a high level of protection for GPs, high relative to the baseline coastline for the rest of the ocean. And so that's why we have the tiered approach. If a GP were nominated and eventually designated by the State Water Board, we would want it to have very, very good water quality. So it is still a high level of protection, but not as stringent as an ASBS. In an ASBS, you would have to maintain natural water quality, and in a general protection area, we would use the Table B, what's currently Table B, but we've proposed to change to Table 1 in the other amendment that I referred to. We would use the instantaneous maximum for stormwater in that area. So there is a difference in stringency between the two.
So could I ask a follow-up? So in instances where they overlap, an ASBS and a marine protected area, those areas of overlap would receive the higher level of protection?
That's right. For an area where an ASBS is currently protecting a marine protected area for water quality purposes. That's correct.
Okay. And in conclusion, I just want to echo the comments of the representatives from the County of Orange. I do believe that there's some ambiguities with respect to how the ranking system would be implemented, and just ask staff to address those in response to comments and revisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Mr. Gully, I told you you could bat cleanup. If you're happy, you don't have to come up.
I'm happy if you're happy.
I'm never happy. Not because of you, don't worry. Anything else? Any comments? Jonathan? I mean, Council Bishop?
Thank you. I've been waiting for that.
Yes.
Recognition. No, just
Don't
if there's
expect
any
a plaque.
direction from the board at this point. Otherwise, we will move forward with reviewing the comments we heard today and the comments we received in writing, and make the appropriate revisions.
I would suspect that from my perspective, a lot of what you need to do is adding clarity to language you already have. Like I said, unless I was loaded up on happy tea when I heard it, a lot of the questions that were raised today, I think, certainly the intent as articulated was very clear to me from our perspective, so adding clarity to those questions would be important.
We will strive to do that.
Fran?
I particularly like the illustration that you had at the end of your presentation, because I think that does clarify. Sometimes a picture is better than words. One comment that was made, Charlie asked about the sand filters for a I guess it was in the Huntington Beach area. That might be
Monterey Bay, but they're all.
Or it could, yeah, Monterey Bay, that's right, a slant well or sand structure. But someone who was commenting actually mentioned screened diversions as well. Since we don't have a policy yet on ocean desal, and screened diversions will possibly be a part of that, I would expect would be a part of that. I'd like for you to look at the issue of screened diversions and whether those would, how those would fit in.
I could give you a quick answer right now, and we'll look at that more closely. But those intakes that have screens, the surface water intakes that have screens, the studies to date have shown that they do still have entrainment. And when we, as we're going through and working on the desal amendment, one of the things that we're considering in there is a mitigation fee that would be for the residual entrainment after the intakes are screened. So I think in terms of providing very sound protections for a state water quality protection area, My gut reaction at this point is that we would still not allow any surface water intakes. Again, that I'm just limiting this to surface water intakes, screened or not. No new surface water intakes in a state water quality protection area.
Okay. Well, I guess what has come up here is we've got ASBSs. We have now the new MPAs. We have the prospect of water quality protection areas in addition to, but not overlapping with, ASBSs. And at some point, we will have a policy on for desalination. Right. And so all of those have to be harmonized. And so, and it need to be clearly harmonized so that the stakeholders understand what's going on where and how. And so I just want to make sure that we are anticipating the ocean desal as well as these other things that have already been identified. Thank you.
I agree, and we're going to try to do that.
Oh, and also the trash policy. I mean, that was brought up. I assume that that's one reason that you have mentioned trash here. And so, again, just keeping in mind what's on our plate for the near-term future, just making sure that it gets coordinated. And for those, I just wanted to compliment everyone who's been engaged for the last, I guess, what is it? How long has the Clean Water Act has been in place? 40 years. For the last 40 years, there's the new. There was a new report out of University of Southern California that complemented the Clean Water Act for the and for all the dischargers who have acted to clean up discharges into the ocean, and the ocean is in fact starting to recover, and it was pretty impressive. So often we can't always answer authoritatively, is what you're doing making a difference? And the answer is yes, and that's very nice. So, and thank you, Mariella. This is Mariella's first board meeting at the dais, so thank you. And Johanna is here as a part of our participation in the Ocean Protection Council, because the Ocean Protection Council has stashed people from the students in a lot of the agencies that work on the Ocean Protection Council. So thank you for being here, and welcome, Mariella.
I would like to echo Fran's welcome to Mariella, and I would like to tell Johanna, for your first presentation, it was very good, and it was very concise. You obviously were confident in what you did and didn't stutter and stammer like I do most of the time up here. And it was nice. It was a refreshing presentation, I will just tell you. Very well done. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Welcome, both of you. With that, you know me, I can't say too many kind words. I'm going to adjourn today's meeting before I ruin my record. Thank you all.
I don't get to do the executive director's report.
Oh!
No, there isn't one. I'm just...
I didn't mean to be insensitive. You want to do it?
There is no executive director's
report.
report.
Well, I knew that, but I didn't want to. Now we're officially adjourned. Thank you.
Welcome back, Vicki.